Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible, right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell. With me is Dr. Don Preston. We are delighted to be with you and looking forward to another great study this evening. Don, how are you, and what's going on in your world?
Oh, doing all right, William. I still have some issues with my throat. That makes it a little bit difficult to talk. But there I go again. It is what it is. I have an appointment with a specialist on the 2nd to see if perhaps I have strained my larynx, my vocal cords, as a result of the strep throat. I don't know. It's bothersome, though. It really is.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you having any type of pain?
Well, unfortunately, some of the discomfort in swallowing has returned, and it didn't bother me to swallow at all for a week or so, but right now it's back to where it's back to where now I'm not going to describe it as really, but it's uncomfortable to swallow, and so that's somewhat disconcerting. Given the fact that it's been 2 months since I had the strep, and you would have thought that all of that discomfort, that everything would have been past and gone, but unfortunately it's not. So, just feel like I'd better get to a specialist, let him take a look at everything. Jan and I were talking about it yesterday, and she goes, I guess that the doctor is going to say, okay, Mr. Preston, you've got to shut up for a while.
I was just sitting here thinking the same thing. When were they going to tell you that?
Yeah. Well, that happened. Goodness gracious. It happened to me 15, 20 years ago. I started having difficulty. I didn't have strep throat, but I started having a lot of difficulty with my voice. And so I went to a voice specialist here in town who's since retired and moved out of town. And, he gave me the examination, and he goes, okay, here's the deal. You have developed polyps on your vocal cords. And he said, you've got a choice here. You either shut up for about 6 weeks, and I'm talking no preaching and the absolute minimum of conversation with people. I'm talking, if you can get by with shaking your head, then that's what you do. Other than that, you keep your mouth shut. But he said these are the type of polyps that can turn into cancer. So you got a choice to make here. You either shut up for about 6 weeks, and he said, I would prefer 2 months. So he said, you do that or you run the risk of cancer. And so, needless to say, I chose the path of not preaching and not trying not to talk. And I must say that what I'm experiencing now is more painful than that was. It's more aggravating than that was. And so that's why I feel, I've absolutely got to get at the bottom of it and see what's going on. I sure do hope he doesn't say, you got to stop talking. But, I've told people before that 3/4 of the way in jest, I said, as a minister, I rely on both my voice and my mind. There are times when I can get by without my mind, but I got to have my voice. But anyway, it will be really, really, really difficult on me if I can't talk. So we just have to see what happens.
Well, I hope that it is something that they can treat, and maybe with just a little bit of rest, they'll be able to get you back to normal. But I know that has to be, aggravating when you're having to clear your throat, after just a few words many times, and if you're having any type of pain.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's constant. It's all day long. It never lets up. And it's naturally worse after I talk for a little bit. For instance, last week after the program, and as you know, I do a lot of my filming on Monday morning. I try to film ahead on my morning musings and get that out of the way so that I don't have that every single day pressure. But last week after the program, my voice was just extremely, extremely weak, and it was bothering me a great deal to swallow. And so, I thought last week after the program that if I was feeling the same prior to tonight, I was actually going to call you and beg off and just simply say, I'm going to have to give my voice a little bit of a break. And she asked me a few moments ago prior to coming on, she said, you going to do your program? I said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to call William at this last minute and bail out on him. So here I am.
Yeah.
Such as it is. So what's going on in your world?
Well, not very much. I've just been monitoring things a bit, kind of, checking in on Facebook, seeing what's going on. I see you still have the same guys, same arguments, pretty much that they make, the same, ad hominem attacks that they have. And so I've looked at that. Sometimes I look for a convenient place to get in, but usually you or someone else has already addressed it. But for the most part, that's what it's been about. Still looking at some of the work that that I'm doing on 1 Corinthians 15, doing some research in that area, and then monitoring some of the other efforts that that we have going on. But for the most part, that's pretty much it. I've got things on the table that I've got to do, and I was just thinking in terms of all the recordings that you do. And I know you say you try to get them all done on Monday, and me of all people understand, how it feels to have this work hanging over your head. But I just wondered if you, split it up to 2 days a week, would that give you some relief from your voice? Because I noticed that, when I'm trying to do a bunch of these programs in advance, after about the third or the fourth one, I get, my voice starts to weaken, and, it becomes a strain. And so I just sometimes have to quit, because I feel like if I keep pushing it, I'm going to, damage, my voice or my throat or whatever. And so I just kind of back off a little bit, even though I haven't been affected by, other than just normal hoarseness or something like that. I haven't had any real serious, complications with it, but I do notice from time to time, and I'll go into a little coughing spell if I'm trying to do, like when I'm getting ready to go out of the country. I have to try to, do as many broadcasts ahead of time as possible, and
Sure.
when I return, I know I'm not going to feel like doing any of them. and so I try to give myself a little bit of, a head start when I come back. Don't always succeed on that, but nevertheless, that's what I try to do. But I get that same thing, and so I just try to back off, a little bit, and give it a rest. But I know it's a little bit more difficult for you to do that. And
like for instance, this week I didn't film my Friday video because after filming Monday through Thursday, I thought, I better give this a break because it was so weak at that particular point, and it was bothering me so much at that point to swallow. So I did, in fact, say, okay, I'm going to break this up, and I will film my Friday video on Wednesday or Thursday, and let my voice rest just a tiny bit. So, like I said, we'll see how things develop, and if the doctor says that I've got to take a break or else risk some permanent damage to my voice, then obviously I'll take a break. I don't know. We get into a pattern of our work. No matter how tough the schedule is, we get into a pattern. We get used to the workload, and it's difficult to change up. It's difficult to take a break from it. You know what that's like.
Oh, yeah.
Even though on one level you're going, well, okay, I don't do that today, but there's always plenty more to do. That's for sure. And so I'm in the midst of writing a book, naturally, on the last day, the last trumpet resurrection. And pardon me, I've actually taken a very small hiatus from that because I started getting into some research on the Feast of Trumpets and its significance and its relationship to the doctrine of the resurrection. And I have just been so enthralled, so thrilled. And I've got to give a shout out to Robert Cruikshank. And I don't know if he ever listens to our program or not, but Robert was one of our speakers at Preterist Pilgrim Weekend this year on the Millennium. And I tell you, he's done some magnificent work, just thrilling stuff on the concept of the 40-year millennium, the use of large numbers to represent a smaller number. And I mean, it's just thrilling stuff. Well, I approached him just recently, and I said, hey, I want you, if you would be willing, I said, I want you to do some searching and try to find me, because, boy, he's got this talent for finding PDF studies, PDF documents on these relevant issues. And I said, I want to find as many or as good of PDF studies on the Feast of Tabernacles. Would you be willing to help me out? And the next thing I know, every single day, I've been getting 3 and 4 absolutely fantastic PDF studies on the Feast of Tabernacle. Now, some of it is produced by people who, you just kind of scratch them off because they're not interested in the actual reality and the actual doctrine behind the Feast of Tabernacles. They try to scratch it up to originating in pagan practices. Okay, I don't have any interest in all of that. I don't believe it for a moment. But so much of it is so thrilling, so rich, and I mean, it's just downright exciting to read a lot of this material. And so, like I said, I put the writing of this book on suspension in order that I might go ahead and have a better understanding. so that I can glean from this scholarship that is out there on the significance, the meaning, the prophetic and typological meaning of the Feast of Tabernacle. And of course, I would just simply point this out. There is a virtual unanimity among scholarship that the Feast of Tabernacles represented, symbolized, foreshadowed, and prophesied the resurrection. So that's not really in doubt at all. I wasn't trying to find confirmation of that, to be honest about it, because I had already done enough research to know that the Feast of Harvest, and that is indicative of what it all means, but the Feast of Sukkot represented or foreshadowed and looked forward to the resurrection of the dead. What I wanted was some scholarly discussion of some of those connections. And again, my goodness gracious, Robert Cruikshank has given me a wealth of information. I haven't been able to read through even half of the PDFs he sent me. We're talking PDFs everywhere from 13, 14, 15 pages long up to doctoral dissertations of over 300 pages long. And I mean to tell you, it is, like I said, it's incredible stuff. So I'm just at this point, I'm going, okay, I'm not going to do any writing. I'm going to do nothing but read. I'm going to do nothing but research. I'm going to absorb as much of this as I can possibly absorb to understand this festival more even than I think that I did. It's a classic example, William, of the more I study this issue, the more I realize how ignorant I was. Even though I'd already done a lot of study on the issue, it's like, holy cow, this is good stuff. So, yeah, it's exciting.
Well, that's good. I listened to one of his lectures, I think he did in Virginia, on those large numbers, yes. And it was outstanding. So if he's giving you, the kind of information similar to the kind of research he had done in that, I know it's got to be some really, really good stuff.
Well, it is. I can assure you it is. He has been drawing on so much scholarship. See, that's the marvelous thing about this. He's not drawing on other preterist writers and other preterist speakers. He is gleaning his information from the scholarly sources that span a good long period of time. And again, not one of them are preterist, or if they are, I haven't found any of them yet. And so what he is finding cannot be scratched up to, and people can't say, oh, well, that's just another preterist, quoting more preterist. No, he is drawing on the best scholarship that is available, and they are actually making the points for him. All he is doing is assimilating, collating, and organizing that material and that information and presenting it in a cohesive, organized manner so that people who either read what he has to say, as he is putting it in a manuscript form at this time or outline form, or they will hear him in his presentations. And so I'll guarantee you, this is just flat good stuff. It really is. And I'm just so very thankful to him for being willing to take the time to do this research and study, to find these PDFs for me. And it's just like I drew on another resource today. My good friend Scott Fisher over in Tennessee. Scott is a whiz-bang. I mean, he's an expert in Logos Bible program. Well, I can turn it on, and I can do basic searches. I don't know how to take advantage of Logos. My goodness gracious, that thing is so vast. And so I contacted him yesterday, And I asked him, can you please do the following research for me? And, I'd be happy to do the research myself if I knew how. But here's a guy who knows how to do that research in Logos. So I contacted him and I said, I want to find as many connections between the Greek word sunagi, sunago, episunagogi, all of which are translated as gather or gather to gather in the Septuagint. And I said, I want to find as many connections between that word and the Feast of Tabernacles. Because I suspect this is just a theory at this point. And, sometimes we have a theory. Sometimes we have an idea about there might be this connection or there might be that connection. And lo and behold, we do our research and we can't confirm it. We can't prove it. So we have to lay that aside until maybe a later time, a later date, when more research material becomes available. We know a little bit more, and maybe we can, maybe we can't confirm the connections. And this is one of those cases. I strongly suspect that there are going to be in either biblical references or in extra biblical references, there are going to be writings that make the connection, and they use the Greek word sunagi, sunago, or episunagogi, and they use those words in connection with the Feast of Tabernacles. Because, after all, it is the Feast of Ingathering. So it's just a natural connection. So I'm really, really, really anxious, and I heard from him today, and he said, I'll be glad to do this research. And so, like I said, I'm very, very excited, number one, that he agreed to do it. I'm really anxious to see if he can come up with some of those connections in the literature, whether it is in Logos or whether it's in some other source that he can outsource and reference through Logos or whatever. Pardon me. So that's kind of the research that I'm involved in right now. As I said a few moments ago, a couple of different times, it's such exciting research. I know Dallas Burdett and I talk, and Dallas is such an incredible inspiration to me. I know he is to you if you talk to him very much. Here is a guy that's well into his 80s. He gets up at between 3 and 4 every morning to do nothing but study and research. He studies the Greek, he studies the Hebrew, and he studies the commentaries, and he buys books at a very, very rapid rate. And so he and I have talked a great deal about what a thrill it is to learn, how sad it is to arrive at a point where we don't think that we have to learn anymore. We know enough. I heard Terry Varner say at a lectureship years and years ago at Denton, Texas, and he was speaking on the AD 70 heresy. And Terry Varner, you've had your own run-ins with him, but Terry Varner said, if what these brethren are saying is true, we've got to change every single thing we've ever taught and learned. Why? We've even got to change our songbook. And most of all, we're going to have to change our doctrine. He said, I want to tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been preaching for 50 years, and I haven't changed even one thing. And I turned to Jan, and I said, he must have stopped studying 50 years ago. And I said it out loud. And I had people turning around, looking at me with that, "You must be the devil in disguise." Who in the world are you? You know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, Jan's going, "Shh, shh, be quiet, be quiet." I said, "Hey, I'm sorry. If you haven't changed in 50 years of preaching, then you stopped studying 50 years ago." I mean, it's just, you know, it's unbelievable that anyone would say, "I haven't changed in 50 years." Now, I understand, okay, I haven't changed. I still believe in the same God that I believed in 50 years ago. I still believe in Jesus as the Son of God that I believed 50 years ago. But it goes beyond that. You and I both know what he meant by that.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that he's not about to change one single thing about his eschatology. That is just not even. That's not on the roadmap for Terry Varner. So anyway, that thrill of learning is still so strong in me. And Dallas Burdett, he's, like I said, he's well into his 80s. He's probably 84, 85 years old now. And yet he thrills to study. He thrills to learn. And I feel exactly the same way. I love to read the scholarly literature, to have them challenge me to think, to look deeper, to change if I need to. And it's an exciting journey to open up our minds, to be willing to change, to be willing to go wherever the evidence leads, to never arrive at the point that says, okay, I don't have to study anymore. I already know everything I need to know, and what have you. That is such a sad state of affairs that I can no longer fathom being comfortable with what I know, or even what I think I know. I just can't fathom that anymore.
Well, I hear you. I mean, it's just amazing that somebody would make that kind of statement. If I look back at what I did 50 years ago, or even 10 or 15, I'd be almost embarrassed at some of the stuff that I didn't know, and the gaps between what I knew then and what I know now. And of course, getting at my age, I began to lose, some of the understanding and, the ability. But nevertheless, it's, as you say, it's a thrill to keep learning and to keep discovering new things, not for the sake of discovering new things, because I know there can be a danger in that if you're just looking for something new, but to have newer insights on passages of things that you didn't see. And that's why sometimes I go back and I look at even the comments on my YouTube channel to see, what people have said, or maybe their arguments to something that I've missed. And I go back and look at them, and they challenge me to revisit it, again, in ways that I didn't see the first time, that they might have even presented that, or I just didn't get a chance to take a look at it. And, it's always something that you pick up that you didn't see the first time. You didn't have enough insight or wisdom or knowledge at that point to see the point that even someone was making that's counter to your point. So these guys who feel like they got it all down and they're not going to study anymore. And the unfortunate thing is you see that a lot with people who come out of the type of camp that Varna comes out of, that group, as you know.
Yes.
You can look at their lecture titles, you can look at their books, and you can look, and there's basically no change. They're quoting the same things and as they did 20, 30 years ago. Nothing has changed. And so it's really, really kind of sad.
Well, I've reached the point, and I don't do this very often because it's too embarrassing, but I used to keep all of my sermons from my beginning days of ministry, because at one point in my early days, I made fairly extensive outlines and made notes and, all this kind of stuff like this, notes in the margin and what have you. And now I must say, I haven't done this in probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 years. I would actually go in to my files, grab one of the folders, and start looking at the outlines and read the things that I was teaching and preaching at that time. And I have to tell you, it was just flat out embarrassing. I found myself so many times going, oh, no, oh, tell me I didn't say that. Tell me I didn't believe that. I mean, it's just like, oh, gee, that's so uneducated. That is so ignorant. That is so not what the Scriptures teach. And yet, I was teaching those things in full conscience, full integrity. I had no ulterior motives whatsoever. I was not simply sermonizing, and by that I mean I wasn't going and grabbing a sermon by somebody else and just simply repeating it and not caring what it said. No, I mean, these were outlines that I was personally putting together after what I thought was study. And yet when I went and looked at it, I was just literally embarrassed that I had said those things. So, we change. Hopefully we change for the better. And it gets back to that process of learning and loving to learn. And that's where I'm at in my life. And that's what I was referring to in regard to all of these PDFs on the Feast of Sukkot and the gathering and what have you. I grabbed some books off of the shelf that I'd read years ago, and I started rereading some of them to refresh my mind about what some of these Jewish, in this case, what some of these Jewish writers had said about the feast days. And I mean, I was refreshing my mind about some things. You talk about being at a point of time and age that maybe you forget things. Well, I guarantee you that's happened. Absolutely has happened. And so you go back and refresh your memory and you find some stuff that you read. In my case, it might have been highlighted in yellow. I might have put a star out there in the margin. I might have said, boy, this is good stuff. And I didn't even remember reading it.
Well,
so it's
I
really
did that.
Good to do that.
Even with your book, you remember I've called you on the phone and asked you about a text. You said, well, I covered that in my book. I go open the book to the page, and I've got the very point highlighted. Didn't even remember reading it and have already gone over it. So, it's like that you do things like that, and you get some of that information all the time.
Well, I keep a database. It's my own personal database. It's not what you would call highly organized. It's just a Don Preston database that when I find what I think is a really significant quote, a significant reference, whether it's historical, whether it's linguistic, whether it's theological, it really doesn't matter to me. If it's a point that is being made by a recognized scholar especially, it doesn't matter if it's a theologian, doesn't matter if it's a Greek scholar, doesn't matter if it's a historian, just simply doesn't matter to me. If, in fact, I believe that it's a significant and helpful quotation, then I go into my database and I'll do a search where I have put other similar quotes in there, And, you know, I'll reference it by any number of different ways so that when I go to look for it, I won't have to look for only one single way to look for it. I will cross-reference it by half a dozen different maybe words, terms, or phrases, so that when I go in and do a search, that I improve my chances of doing it. And I'll give you a prime example of this. And this takes us really right to our subject of the Messianic temple, so that we can segue into that this evening. And pardon me, I was reading an article by George Eldon Ladd. Now, listen, ladies and gentlemen, in the 50s, 60s, and I don't know if George Eldon Ladd is still alive. Do you happen to know that, William? William, are you there? Hello? William, are you there? Did we drop a call? Ooh. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm here. I stepped away and got some water.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you aware whether or not George Eldon Ladd is still alive? I don't remember.
I'm not aware of whether or not he's still alive. I do have, of course, a couple of his books, but I'm not sure. Right.
Well, anyway, I was making the point that just over the last little bit, I've been reading some articles by him that appeared in a publication that was produced in the 50s, in the mid 50s, and even into the 60s. And this publication, if anybody wants the name of it, I just went totally blank about the name of the publication. But anyway, they were basically dedicated to promoting George Eldon Ladd. And they made no bones about it. They considered him to be the ultimate theologian of the day. And make no mistake about it, George Eldon Ladd was one of the most highly respected theologians during that period of time. Highly respected across the spectrum of all scholarship. He was just an outstanding scholar. And I was reading a comment by him, and he was talking about the source of Paul's doctrine, or something close to that as the title of the article. And George Eldon Ladd made the comment, and it just jumped off the page at me because it sounds so preteristic, because it is what you and I have focused on for 45 years now, or whatever. And it is something that we say in sermon and lesson and video after video after video, and that's this. George Eldon Ladd said, we must always keep in mind that no matter what else we may think, we must acknowledge at all time that the source of Paul's eschatology were the Old Testament scriptures and promises given to Israel. And you're going, wow. Okay. He certainly was not a preterist. And he even points out, he said that scholars of the day have convinced many people that New Testament and biblical and Pauline eschatology was drawn from the Greco-Roman world of even Gnosticism and Grecian worldview. But he said that's erroneous. And he says that's not to say that Paul was not aware of Greek thought, was not aware of Greek writers, because he clearly was. But when Paul wrote, he was writing from a purely Hebraic world view, because Paul was a Jew, and he was writing from the Hebraic perspective, drawn from the Old Testament. Now, if that doesn't resonate with us and with listeners, then I would suggest that they give another thought to it. And again, this is not a preterist writer. This is not a preterist scholar. This is a man that was just simply highly respected on the world stage of biblical scholarship as one of the best scholars in the world. And he was pointing out what you and I and most preterists take for granted, what we teach, and yet we literally get ridiculed for saying, and that is, all biblical eschatology is based upon God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And so, boy, I reached over to the computer, I put that journal right in front of me, and I typed out the entire quote. Because that's just good stuff. That is scholarly, credible documentation of what we know to be the truth. And yet when we, as preterists, say it, like I said, we are often ridiculed and condemned, and people scoff at us as if we are saying something that's never been said, never been known, never been taught by anybody before. So that kind of quote, but that gets back to that learning process. And I said that segues into very, very well, and we don't have a whole lot of time left in the program this evening, but it brings us back to the doctrine of the Messianic temple. And we talked about last week Malachi chapter 1, verse 11, in which the Lord said, from the rising of the sun to the going down, that my name shall be great among all of the Gentiles, and sacrifice shall be offered to me in every place. And how radical of a statement that was. Because Jerusalem was the place for sacrifice to be offered. It was the exclusive venue for the temple and the cultus, for the observation of the feast days. And so for the Lord to say that the time was coming in which that was going to be radically changed, and people anywhere, everywhere, including the Gentiles, would glorify God from the rising of the sun to the setting. That was astounding. Well, we come forward to the New Testament. And the book of John is a book that, strangely enough, and one Australian scholar, a woman by the name of Mary Chloe, Choloe, boy, she wrote a really, really good book on the temple in John, in the Gospel of John. And I recommend that anyone read that. Are there some bones in there that you'll have to pick out? Sure. No doubt about that, because she's one of these somewhat liberal scholars. She believes John was actually written after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, et cetera, et cetera. And you're reading along with some of the great comments that she's making, and you're going, why can't you see that this pointed to the coming destruction of Jerusalem, instead of saying, well, we all know it was written after the fact? So that kind of thing happens without a doubt. But Mary Chloe, in her book on the temple in John, makes some really, really incredible observations that from the very beginning of the book of John, the Gospel of John, until the end of the book, the theme is the temple. Well, we ought to pick up on that. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That's temple reference. The word, skine, tabernacle, tent, dwelt among us. Here in John 1:14, at the very beginning of the book, we are introduced to the motif of temple, of God's dwelling among men. Only now it's not physical. Now it's in the person of Jesus Christ. He is God dwelling among us. Just as Matthew was told, or Matthew records, that when the birth of Jesus was announced, his name shall be called Emmanuel, God with us. And here is the Word who became flesh and dwelt, tabernacled among men. So, like I said, I would recommend, and if anybody wants the full, proper name of that book, just contact me, and I'll be more than happy to share that, because it really is a book that is worthwhile, very scholarly, but it's easy to read. And again, you'll have to pick out a few bones in it, but hey, there's not a book that you can buy that there aren't a few bones in, that you have to pick out, and you have to just kind of say, well, okay, whatever, and move on. But you'll enjoy reading this book. I have several notes in my database from that book by Merritt Kellogg. So, with that in mind, why is the book of John, why does the book of John focus on the temple? Well, the reason for that is simple, is because as we have demonstrated on this program in our somewhat lengthy study of the Messianic temple now, because John's a good, faithful Jew. And John knows the Old Testament spoke of the coming temple of God, the Messianic temple of God. He knew of the apostasy that took place when the 10 northern tribes, when you read 1 Kings chapter 11 and forward, he knew that Jeroboam had gone up to the northern regions of the land of Israel and established another temple, established another priesthood, established a different set of offerings on a different mountain of God, so to speak. And so John's very acutely aware of the motifs of temple, and by the way, of priesthood as well. Because all throughout the book of John, you have Jesus presented as the priest of God. Oh my goodness, I just went totally blank. I believe it's Tom Holland. In one of his books, made the comment that Jesus' prayer in John chapter 17 follows the outline of a high priestly prayer. Now, that's pretty significant, because if the book of John discusses and carries within it the theme of temple throughout, then the book of John closes, or begins to close, in chapter 17 with Jesus serving as a high priest, uttering a high priestly prayer. So all of this is incredibly significant. And you find in John chapter 2 that Jesus goes to the temple. There he observes the money changers, who are, by the way, serving a perfectly legitimate function, according to some scholars. And what do we mean by that? Well, we mean by that travelers, pilgrims, worshipers who were traveling to Jerusalem did not and could not always bring their sacrifices with them. I mean, there's always a possibility. You may start out with a beautiful, flawless lamb or a goat or pigeons or whatever. On your journey to Jerusalem from wherever, Syria or even Rome, for crying out loud, and something may happen to that animal, that it gets injured. Well, it's no longer an acceptable sacrifice. And so what so many pilgrims did is they did not take any sacrifices with them, didn't take any animals with them. They waited until they got to Jerusalem, and there in the temple. Now, make no mistake, the Sadducees are the ones who generally, although Pharisees certainly chimed in and contributed to it, but the Sadducees basically ruled the temple precincts. And they set up these money laundering tables, and they sold sacrifices to these pilgrims. Now, again, they're serving a perfectly legitimate function, but they were ripping the people off. They were charging exorbitant fees. And you can read an awful lot about this in E.P. Sanders. It really a brilliant scholar in his works on Jesus and Judaism, Paul and Judaism as well. But nonetheless, he points out that what we call the money changers, what they were doing was not wrong within itself. What was wrong was the way they were doing it. They were charging exorbitant fees for the sacrifices, and they were charging an exchange fee to change foreign money into the temple shekel, because you couldn't properly offer money that was minted in a foreign country and had a picture, for instance, of any kind of an animal on it. That was unacceptable as an offering in the temple itself. That was considered a form of idolatry. And so the money changers would say, okay, well, you've got a shekel here, but actually a shekel was a Jewish measure, not a Roman coin or what have you. But anyway, you have a denarius here, a Roman coin, but it's got a likeness of the emperor on it. Well, we won't accept that. So instead of giving you the equal value of the denarius, we're going to charge you a 10% or 15% or 20% exchange rate. That's what was wrong. And so Jesus, seeing the corruption, the dishonesty, the graft that was taking place there in the temple, he made himself a whip out of some strands of leather. And he began to overturn the tables. And he began to whip and lash these money changers. And, of course, he did this twice. He did it at the beginning of his ministry in John chapter 2. He did it at the end of his ministry in Matthew 22. And on that second occasion, he said, "You have turned my Father's house into a den of thieves." This house is to be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. So here we have Jesus attacking these money changers, these abusers of the temple. Now, it's difficult, I'm sure, for us today to grasp the drama. I don't know of a better word to use. No one had done this. You okay there, William?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just adjusting my seat.
It sounded like you fell over or something there. I thought maybe I was putting you to sleep. So
no, I'm
anyway,
right here with you.
Okay, no one had done this before. The Essenes were so convinced of the corruption of the temple that instead of attempting to correct anything, instead of doing anything like Jesus did here, they withdrew, went out by the Dead Sea and established their community. Now, they would occasionally come back to Jerusalem. There was even a gate at Jerusalem called the Essene Gate. And so they would occasionally come back and they would occasionally offer sacrifices and what have you. But by and large, they didn't want anything to do with the temple. So what Jesus did here is essentially unprecedented. What Jesus did here was more than remarkable. So far as Josephus is concerned, and Jehoiakim Jeremias, another great scholar, Jerusalem and the temple in the time of Jesus, the Messiah, points out how corrupt the temple system was under the Sadducees. And, he shares how the corruption was so widespread and so well known that lots and lots of people absolutely stopped going to the temple because of the corruption. It was like, to put this in modern analogy, I'm not going to go to church when the preacher is a thief. I'm not going to go to church and have a preacher standing in the pulpit that we all know is an adulterer. And by the way, a lot of that went on in the temple at Jerusalem. There were lots and lots of morbid moral transgressions on the part of the priesthood. It wasn't just financial. And so that's the kind of environment into which Jesus walked, in which the normal Jew, every time he went to the temple, he had to see this corruption going on. And so here is Jesus. Boy, he walks up to the table of those who are selling the doves, and he says, you take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. And his disciples remembered, zeal for your house has eaten me up. That's from Psalms chapter 69, by the way. And by the way, well, I don't have time to get into this, but the connection of Psalm 69 with the Jewish feast days, proper observance and the improper observance of the feast days leading to the destruction of Jerusalem and the judgment on the Jews. I mean, it just permeates Psalm 69. And, by the way, Paul, in Romans chapter 11, and I don't mean to digress so much here, but this is so fascinating to me. Paul in Romans chapter 11 talks about their table. Let their table become a snare for them. Taken directly out of Psalms chapter 69. And Scott McKnight, hosts of other scholars point out that reference is a reference to the festal banquets. And so what David was saying in the Psalms was their feast days are actually going to become a snare unto them. They're going to entrap them because of their perversion of the feast days, first of all. But a couple of scholars even suggest that Psalm 69 was kind of implicitly hinting at the idea that the judgment of Jerusalem would fall on the feast days. Now, we know that from Matthew 23:39. You will not henceforth see the Son of Man until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That was taken directly out of the feast days. That was taken out of the Halal Psalms, of Psalms 118 and following. And so, all of these festal references, here you have Jesus quoting from a psalm, the apostles, when Jesus did what he did to cleanse the temple, they reflected on Psalm 69, the zeal of the Lord's house has eaten me up. And remember, John was there when this happened. John's one of them that remembered and reflected on Psalms chapter 69. Well, I mean, did the apostles just simply draw that statement, zeal for the Lord's house has eaten me up? I mean, did they just conjure that up out of thin air? Or did they not see, did they not reflect on the connection between an abuse of the feast days? And by the way, John chapter 2, the purging of the temple took place on Passover, which was a time for a festal meal. I hope I'm opening up some of the connections here for the listener to contemplate of how temple festivals, and prophecy all tie together. Right here in John chapter 2, at the very, very beginning of the gospel. I mean, to me, this is just really, really, really rich stuff. But we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this evening's Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And, of course, great to be with you, William. With that, I will say good night and God bless.
All right. Thank you, Don. That was really good stuff, the insights and the connections on the feast days, along with John. And we appreciate that very much. And thank God that your voice held up well also. So look forward to hearing you back on next week. Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.